So let's move over to our deep shots of the week. This is one of our favorite segments on the show where we get to throw out these deep names, these hot takes, guys that are not rostered. We're not saying these are our waiver pickups of the week. These are more desperation shots. These are DFS plays. These are just guys that we like that you would not expect to have a good game. And the first one here, admittedly, it's pretty gross, but I want to come out hot to start the year. My deep shot of the week is a quarterback. And it's Mitch Trubisky against the Giants in a very similar matchup to what we just saw against Detroit. On the road in Detroit, Mitchell Trubisky threw the ball 36 times, completed 20 of those attempts, so only a 55% completion rate, 242 yards, though, and 3 touchdowns. And then he had 3 carries on the ground for 26 yards. That was a 25-point fantasy week from Mitch Trubisky. And as gross of a name as he is, as much as we don't like him as a long-term starter in this league, I hate him in a dynasty unless you can get him extremely low, because I don't think he's going to be a starter for that much longer unless he just completely changes who he is as a player.
Calling me out, Steph. I've got him in our dynasty league. You know this.
Shots fired. But when he plays, he's had fantasy value. This is a high-flying matchup. I think he's going to rush more in this game. We saw Big Ben have 3 rushes as well, and that's a guy that is more torso than he is lower body. So I think
the old Mr. Incredible build.
Exactly. Trubisky has a little bit more athletic ability, and he was slinging it. He was third on the week. He had 6 deep ball attempts in that game, where Allen Robinson had a pretty quiet week, so expect big things from Anthony Miller as well in this matchup. I like him as a kind of deeper spot start guy, a flex option. And Trubisky was also third in red zone attempts. So without David Montgomery in there, it's not like they get into the red zone and start cramming it up the middle. They're asking Trubisky to find ways to score when they get down there. Part of that could also be them constantly being in third down situations in the red zone. But nonetheless, I like Trubisky as a spot start. I have him in some DFS options where I'm plugging in some of our more chalk picks like Ezekiel Elliott. I think Derrick Henry is going to eat this week, and Aaron Jones is going to dominate as well. I got all 3 of those guys in my DraftKings lineups because I was able to put Mitch Trubisky in at quarterback with a ton of upside this week. So I know it's a gross one, but when Trubisky breaks out again in week 2, you heard it here first.
For sure, and that's why we wait on quarterbacks. You can stream a guy like Mitch Trubisky, and last week he was the quarterback 8 on the week. Hopefully he gets there again for the sake of this deep shot of the week take, Steph, but I'm going to go with someone who's a little bit deeper, and I know Mitch Trubisky is only rostered in 8% of leagues, so that was pretty solid there, but I'm going to go with Danny Amendola, only rostered in 9% of leagues, and I think you could do a lot worse at your flex in a PPR league if you're in a really deep pinch. There's a ton of guys this week with questionable status: Devontae Parker, Kenny Golladay, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, Mike Evans, Jamison Crowder. The list goes on and on. By the time you're listening to this, maybe we have some clarity on a couple of those guys. Most of them seem like they're hamstring injuries. So hopefully we have some clarity and you can prepare going into the week. And I'm sure news has broken, in the couple days or hours or whatever it is till you're watching this. But if you get to Sunday and it's a game time decision and you have one of those guys that's out and you're in a pinch and you don't know what to do, instead of tilting and going with some terrible option on the waiver wire that's all upside, why not go with Danny Amendola, who can get you a very solid high floor game in your flex? And with Kenny G being one of those guys that could be out this week as of right now, or he could be out there playing but limited, I think Danny Amendola is a good option either way. Danny had 5 catches for 81 yards in week 1. That was on 7 targets, a tough matchup against the Bears defense. So if he's getting you 13 PPR points in your flex as someone who you can just go pick up off the waiver wire anytime, that's pretty solid. And this week he gets a much better matchup at the Green Bay Packers. Packers were in a high-flying game last week. We talked about Rodgers a little bit earlier on the pod, and we expect him to do big things this week against the Lions. So I expect it to be a pretty pass-heavy game script for the Detroit side of the ball. And the thing is, Danny Amendola has actually proven to be a PPR machine throughout his whole career, and he can be hit or miss sometimes, but he's proven to have really, really solid pop games. And when we look at 2019, he had 4 games of 17 PPR points or more, averaged 6 targets a game last season. So if you're in a desperation situation, Amendola could be plugged in and have you a really solid week. I don't think he's going to take the top off and go for 30 points. That's not the kind of deep shot this is. This isn't the Darius Slayton, level of deep shot, the Deshaun Jackson, the guy who's going to go for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But if you're looking for a floor play that has the potential to get close to 20 points, I think there's a lot worse options out there than Danny Amendola.
We love plugging in these, high floor slot guys, like Steven Sims, like we were last year. And Danny Amendola fits right into that for all those reasons. So I think you made a pretty good case there. If you're desperate, if you need a flex filler, something like that, plug Danny Amendola in there. I love that. Let me talk about my second and final deep shot of the week. It's another wide receiver. It's a guy that I took some victory laps on last year. I was plugging him in 3 or 4 weeks back to back to back, and it's Russell Gage out of the Atlanta Falcons. He's the number 3 wide receiver there behind Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, but they're against Dallas this week. We've talked about how much we love that matchup on both sides of the ball. It should be a high-flying matchup, and I think Matt Ryan's going to need to get the ball out quick with this Cowboys pass rush coming in. I think Russell Gage is going to suck in a lot of the underneath volume playing from the slot. He is their primary slot guy, and we talked about some of the snap rates with the 3 wide receivers on the Cowboys side of the ball. Atlanta operates very similarly. Calvin Ridley, 86%. Julio Jones, 82%. Russell Gage, 70%. So for a guy who's 3rd on the depth chart, he's out there a ton. He was 5th on the week in terms of total number of routes run. Matt Ryan, in a matchup against the Seahawks, it was a high-flying game script, just like we expect this one to be, or at least hope this one will be. He led the league in pass attempts with 54 and led the league in pass yardage with 450. So this is going to be a high-volume offense. Saw 12 targets last week. That was 5th amongst all wide receivers. So for a guy that's going to be in a great situation, I'm not necessarily in love with the talent that Gage has, but he's in a great situation and he's relatively efficient. 5th on the week in week 1 with yards after the catch, with 46 total of those. And I expect him to be relied upon in this matchup. Could even get into the end zone as well. Plug in Russell Gage at your flex, or plug him in as a deep DFS option. I love him this week against Dallas.
Yeah, Steph, I love the pick, and I know we talked a little bit about the Cowboys-Falcons game earlier on the pod. Bottom line, put your wide receivers in from this game on both sides of the ball. They go 3 deep, and I think Russell Gage is a candidate to have a really nice game. And you look at what he did to end last season as well. You talked about how you were rolling him out on a weekly basis. Over the last 6 games of last season, Russell Gage averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game. So he was getting it done. That was more fantasy points per game over that stretch than Cortland Sutton, than DK Metcalf, right behind Tyreek Hill. So he was getting it done. So this isn't just like a one-hit wonder for Russell Gage. He's going to have involvement in this offense. I think Hayden Hurst and Russell Gage could go back and forth as far as fantasy relevant weeks, but from a floor perspective, I think Russell Gage is a lock to get 5 or 6 targets in this game minimum, and hopefully we see what we saw in week 1, which was the 12 target performance. So I'll go ahead and go with my second deep shot of the week. It's Jerick McKinnon at the New York Jets.
Jet, baby!
We talked about Raheem Mostert in the starts of the week section as your running back choice, but Jerick McKinnon, man, he is back like he never left, even though he definitely was gone there for a couple of years. But it was nice to see him out there and looking healthy in week 1.
Good.
We were like, this is a guy where you kind of got to see it to believe it after he's been out of the league for a couple of years with those knee issues. But in week 1, he had 31% of snaps, which I know isn't anything crazy, but 3 carries for 24 yards rushing, great efficiency there. And then through the air, he had 5 targets, 3 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown on those targets. So Jerick McKinnon, I doubt you started him in week 1, and for the few people that did, or if you had him in DFS, he put up a solid performance for where you got him. And here in week 2, we've talked about this matchup. The Jets are terrible. Their defense is terrible. And the 49ers pass-catching group is absolutely decimated. So this is a bit of a desperation play. I know with 31% of snaps, you're not necessarily targeting Jerick McKinnon in your starting lineup. Tevin Coleman should see more involvement as well. But in a game where George Kittle could be out or limited, Debo is out, the list goes on. Jalen Hurd is out for the season. Travis Benjamin opted out. Brandon Ayuk is banged up. He's got some issues. So I think Jerick McKinnon will be involved again as a pass catcher in this game. Jimmy G seemed like he could rely on him there in week 1. And Jerick McKinnon's only rostered in 18% of leagues. So if you're really in a tough position at running back and you're in a PPR league, roll Jerick McKinnon out there. Hope he gets 5 or 6 targets in this game. He should see some work on the ground as well, especially if the 49ers jump out to a lead. And he's got a good shot to get into the end zone again. So Jerick McKinnon, my second deep shot of the week for week 2.
What I think is a really sneaky part of plugging in Jet against the Jets is they were using Jerick McKinnon in the slot. And if George Kittle's not going to be out there's some interesting ways that he could be utilized in this offense, especially with no Debo. You know, we talk about how Debo gets used as a gadget player, even though he is a guy who can operate as an X wide receiver 1 on the outside, but they still use him in these interesting ways. I think we could see some of that with Jerick McKinnon lining up in the slot, getting more usage in the pass game. And I know he only got 3 carries, but he looked good on those carries, 8 yards per attempt. And he got some red zone touches. He actually got 5 red zone touches. So if he gets into the end zone here with some of that volume in this super easy matchup, I love Jerick McKinnon for all the same reasons. I'm smashing on Raheem Mostert in week 2.